Thank you for joining our webinar here with Cipher and AppGuard. This webinar today will be covering healthcare corporations versus malware attacks. When the rules of the game work to your disadvantage, change the rules, add another different layer of protection. Today, our speakers are going to be Dave Rickard from Cipher, who is our CTO of North America, along with Eric Iverson from AppGuard, who is AppGuard's Director of Marketing. Thanks for joining us here today. We will be recording the session here, and if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat, and we will have time to go over any questions at the end. And this recording will also be available for later viewing as well. So Dave and Eric, I'll let you take it away from here.
Well, thank you. This is Eric. Hello, everybody. Today's webinar is about a large healthcare enterprise, and they have thousands of endpoints. And their situation was that they had antivirus, EDR, and other forms of malware detection defenses, but from time to time, malware was still getting through. And so they had this new CISO join them, and he sought to change the status quo. And what this webinar is overall about is their experience in testing that hypothesis of what if we add another layer of protection that isn't based on detection. And we'll talk about their experience in deploying AppGuard as an added layer of protection to plug the holes.
Thank you, Eric. Again, I'm Dave Rickard, CTO North America with Cipher. 30 years in technology, well over 30 years, and 22 years devoted to cybersecurity. Another thing that we'll be touching on during this presentation, and thank you for attending, is human bias. Human beings have a natural bias towards preventative measures. They want to be able to put up a firewall, turn the lights out, and let the firewall take care of it. It doesn't really work that way. Beyond that, then, if something bad happens, they want detection capabilities. They want to be notified. But even beyond that, it's very important to have an incident response capability. And speed of response is the name of the game. In fact, the average breach cost in the US in 2022 so far is $9.5 million per event. And this is exacerbated by very long time to recognize an indication of compromise. AppGuard has some unique abilities to avoid that kind of time lag, which on average in the US is 220 days in the US this year. On top of all of that, there's a 30% probability that you will incur such a breach cost in the next 24 months. And so it's a business risk. It's very important to your business that you have a well-rounded program and overcome these kinds of biases. Now, using a SOAR platform, a security orchestration and automation response platform, is a good idea, but not everything can be automated using SOAR right now. And so it's critically important that you have talented people with expertise and experience in your security operations center or SOC in order to carry out incident response, from detection that something has happened to having an escalation profile or escalation path for that type and category of event, to carrying out incident response and remediation, starting with containment. We'll touch on all of these things during this presentation.
Okay, so let's look at the situation. Now, me as a vendor, I have a bias of my own. I tend to favor the preventative type endpoint protections that are controls based, whereas many in the industry have a bias in favor of that detection oriented type of protection that is based on some form of pattern matching. And so the premise here was the incoming CISO found that what they had, their AV, their EDR, and their other technologies to defend the enterprise, relied solely on some form of pattern recognition, and malware was getting through. So the hypothesis he wanted to test with AppGuard was, what if we add another layer of protection software that gets installed on the endpoints. Will that help us deal with this problem of malware still getting past our AV, EDR, and other things? And so we're going to look at this in greater detail, but we're also going to look at this not just from the tools perspective in terms of what's on the endpoint, but from the greater perspective. And Dave in particular, with all his many years of experience in security services and security operations, is going to repeatedly emphasize to us at various times throughout this presentation those other aspects of cybersecurity that are essential. Dave?
Yes, and the thing to keep in mind is that things like antivirus and endpoint detection and response that rely on signatures and pattern matching do represent a detection bias. And the problem with having a bias like that is that you may tend to ignore altogether or not put enough effort into other very important aspects of your security operations. Whereas vulnerability management is another very important ingredient. Placing all your focus on vulnerability scanning and remediation can result in a prevention bias. And even having said that, the thing is that most companies will have a cadence that they run their vulnerability scanning and patching and remediation, perhaps on a quarterly basis, perhaps on a monthly basis. News lately is that the average time to exploit a vulnerability after it is disclosed is 2 weeks. And so vulnerability management is a very, very important ingredient. It just needn't overshadow other aspects of security operations. Today, Eric is going to represent the prevention bias. AppGuard is especially good at prevention. And I'll represent detection biases because Cipher is an MSSP, 24/7 by 365 monitoring and escalations leading to incident response is our core business.
Okay, so let's kind of review briefly why malware detection is not enough. And there was this analysis by the Identity Theft Resource Center. They put out quarterly reports all the time where they looked at all the cyber attack data breaches, and you can infer from their data that roughly 46% of the 2021 cyber attack data breaches were due to some form of failed endpoint protection. Now most of us see some of these reports either from them or from somebody else from time to time. Not everybody sees these things. But you know what we all see, those of us that look at the trade publications on a weekly, if not daily basis, is we're always seeing headlines. And what we often see in headlines are featured malware samples, malware of the week, malware of the month. And the reason that these articles exist is because not every AV or EDR or other tool is detecting them. They make news, this new malware of the week or malware of the month, because these detection-based tools are not recognizing these malware. The adversaries are making changes to their techniques or their variations of techniques, changing the files, changing behaviors. They're doing it all the time to evade detection. And that's why you see when you look closely at any form of detection-based technology that their pattern matching data that their tools rely upon is not static. It's always changing. After some big headline of some malware that's wreaked havoc across the world, you're going to find that most of those different agents for those different vendors' products have received shortly after some new pattern matching detection data. But because things are imperfect is why we keep seeing different statistics and reports about more data breaches, increased volume of data breaches, longer time to discover, or what have you. And so we're back to the detection versus the prevention bias. AppGuard is not a detection tool. it is a preventative tool. It's based on controls-based protections. And but we don't recommend that you deploy only AppGuard on endpoints. We don't recommend that you replace all of your AV EDR with AppGuard. We like to think we're not too biased, but we do have our biases. But then the other bias is those people that think detection alone is enough, and we disagree with that. And of course, fortunately, we've got Cipher with us, and Dave in particular, who sees the merit of all sides. And Dave, what would you like to add at this point?
Well, I think that 0 days are a possible caveat to reluctance to rely entirely on pattern matching or signature-based protections. But the thing is that even the pattern matching technologies are of great value still. Tried and true techniques like that have a big value, especially in a scenario that involves defense in depth. All security practitioners have heard of, they're well familiar with what defense in depth is all about. Should you abandon your AV or EDR entirely in favor of something like AppGuard that operates by detecting indications of attack rather than indications of compromise? Now, if AppGuard is blocking the attack, your EDR or AV will never see a compromise because it won't happen. It will save you money in that regard. Again, $9.5 million breach cost on average with a 220-day time lag to identify an indication of compromise. This drives the breach cost up by more than double in order to preserve the value of your company. And in fact, that is the purpose of cybersecurity and practitioners such as we. To preserve your corporate value, you should have a response capability as quick as possible. That is really the name of the game. Eric?
Well, that's a great foundation for what the perspective was for that incoming CISO at this health industry enterprise. He was basically looking to make a meaningful change to the status quo. Now, he had heard about AppGuard, and therefore he wanted to conduct a proof of concept deployment of AppGuard on a sampling of his machines. So AppGuard was deployed on some machines that already had their existing antivirus and EDR tools on it. And the result was there happened to be yet another attack on their enterprise while this was underway. And what they observed was those endpoints with AppGuard on it were not compromised, but those endpoints without some of those endpoints without AppGuard were compromised. And so this was a pretty telling indicator for the CISO, and he decided right on the spot, we need to get AppGuard out to all of these endpoints. And so we were deploying AppGuard within a week or so of this on hundreds of critical servers to protect them as quickly as possible. But the story is a little bit larger than that because they also found that they were unhappy with their particular EDR. So they decided to broaden the changes to replace the old EDR with a new EDR. So basically what that meant was for the next month or so, they would not only be deploying AppGuard, but a new EDR. And in that time period, they would be starting with the default policies for both products, which tend to be less restrictive, and then tuning them for the particular endpoints and such that are out there over the course of a few weeks or what. But they also made another decision. They felt it was more important to get this better protection out there sooner than later. So they also decided they would do the integration of the AppGuard data and the new EDR data into their SIEM. They would do it after they finished the deployments of both. So from a security practitioner perspective, I'm sure Dave has a few thoughts on that.
Absolutely. And it's a tough choice to make. You know, what they decided to do was concentrate their manpower on deployment and due to manpower constraints, not integrate in with a SIM as they're deploying. Now, you can monitor EDR and AppGuard separately and independently through their own management consoles. But what Cipher would rather see is that logs from the management consoles are ingested into the SIM so that as more agents are deployed, we are aware of their activities. We take in their logs into a SIM, a security incident and event management platform. It correlates the logs together, something that is seen on a firewall, that is seen on an IPS, that is also seen on an endpoint. This raises the fidelity of the event a great deal. It gives us confidence that it's a true positive. And given the nature of whatever the event might be, whatever alarm our analysts would see on the SIM, we can then use the management consoles for EDR and AppGuard as a means of analysis. What exactly is going on? Can we do some forensics? Can we trace this back to the inception of the event itself? What is the root cause? And escalate appropriately and speed up incident response. Now, all of our 24/7 monitoring and escalations clients tend to find that their initial value, the great value that they get, is during onboarding with Cipher. This is because we start to report to the client what we're seeing. We make recommendations as to what severity or priority this event should have based on the type and category of event that it is. And we may propose, for instance, to us, this is a medium priority. We would like to open a ticket in our proprietary portal and send email notifications about this event. The client's feedback might be, well, you know, that's authorized and expected activity. We'd rather not see it, and that's fine. We tailor the solution to suit their needs. Or they may say, this is a higher or even critical priority to us. We need more in the way of notification. And so in addition to the ticket being raised in the portal and email notifications being sent, we'll traverse a call tree and make sure that we get in touch with somebody as quickly as possible. In a critical severity or priority, we may even apply our tier 3 support to that. We have a 3-tiered system, which we'll review here in just a few minutes, to directly assist in containment and remediation of the event itself. All in aggregate, these escalation profiles make up an incident response playbook, and that is a very critical ingredient to a successful security operations program. So SIM correlation and alarming in this case could have prevented any damage. It could have lowered the threshold of recognizing an indication of attack and indication of compromise to just minutes, perhaps hours, rather than a much longer time period. That will lower breach costs, and that is our goal. Eric?
Thank you, Dave. Sounded like your dog might have been sounding off some alerts in the background there. I wish I had a dog.
We have an intruder in the driveway.
Uh-oh. So
that's an indication of attack, is what that is.
Okay. So the deployment of both AppGuard and the new EDR had just about finished when that infamous SolarWinds attack stuff started occurring. And for those of you that don't know, this regards the compromise of a large software vendor's infrastructure, such that when the vendor's own infrastructure pushed out software updates to the end customer computers, malware was pushed into those computers. Now, AppGuard didn't prevent those malicious files from getting pushed into the computers. No, what AppGuard did was it prevented the malware once in there from doing what it wanted to do. But coincidentally, also while these SolarWinds attacks were underway, they were also hit by Emotet attacks. Those have been around for years. We're not going to go into much detail about the Emotet malware, just that it's kind of interesting that both of these attacks occurred basically in an overlapping manner, and the customer fared well as a result of things. So here's a bit of a timeline here. So basically, remember, the SIM had not been adjusted to consume the new EDR or the AppGuard data yet. They're being managed separately. This was all a tough choice to get these protections out sooner rather than later. So about 10 days before the discovery actually took place, AppGuard was blocking something that the EDR was not sounding off any alerts for, not saying it detected anything. And so that is our first indication of something going on. So when AppGuard was blocking something. And then just a few days before the detection again, AppGuard is blocking some other things. Some PowerShell activity and some other activities in the attempt to install and execute Cobalt Strike and add some various payloads and make some settings changes here and there, that sort of thing. And basically, the morning of the day when things were detected, very similar things were attempted yet again. But in both this day and the previous day, AppGuard had blocked those things, but the new EDR had not. So now we're getting to when things start to get a little interesting. One of the IT guys needed to perform some maintenance on one of the servers. And so he disabled AppGuard on that server. And when he did so, then some interesting things began to happen and the EDR detected something. Now, mind you, many days have passed since the SolarWinds malware attacks were making the headlines, and all those days were used by all of the respective vendors to push out new pattern matching detection data to the agents. So when they disabled AppGuard and all of these activities started to occur, the EDR was able to detect stuff because it had updated pattern matching data that was specific to this attack. What's also interesting is while we generally characterize AppGuard as a preventative tool, it still delivers value after some form of compromise has occurred. Because remember, AppGuard's purpose is not to detect malware or what have you. It's to not let malware do what it needs to do. So even afterwards, when on that server, when it was attempting to do bad things, AppGuard was still blocking those bad things after it had been allowed to progress through its attack sequence a little bit. AppGuard was still blocking. Now, this is from just the endpoint protection perspective that's occurring on the respective agents here. I'm going to ask Dave to comment on this from a more security operations perspective.
Yes, thank you, Eric. And we can see by this slide that some EDR defenses were successful. As soon as AppGuard was not blocking the event, the EDR detected it, and yet the time of response to turn AppGuard back on after the maintenance window was either after the maintenance window expired and AppGuard was turned back on, or we received notification from the EDR that something was going on and action needed to be taken. Nonetheless, it took well over almost 5 hours for a response to be had, for an awareness first to be raised, and then a response to be undertaken. That's the kind of thing that an MSSP like Cipher seeks to avoid. Now, if the AppGuard logs had been ingested into a SIM, being monitored 24/7 by an MSSP like Cipher, we would have seen it 10 days before the detection by EDR on this timeline. We would have seen that AppGuard was blocking activity. We would have notified, possibly in a low severity type of situation, we would have raised a ticket in our portal. So if anybody on the client's side noticed that the ticket had been raised, they would know that there's something to look at, some action to be taken. Now, by the time we saw it a second time, we would have raised the severity. We would have sent email notifications as well. And by the time the third instance of it would be detected, we would have raised the severity again. We would have undertaken forensics and threat hunting and taken actions to negate the root cause of it, so that by the time the maintenance window came, AppGuard was turned off, the EDR agent detected that something was going on, perhaps the maintenance window would have been moved or delayed. Perhaps it would have been undertaken without turning AppGuard off. This would be due to activities taken in a sandbox or a QA, a testing environment, to ensure that whatever the maintenance window was for wouldn't be hindered by AppGuard running. That's a very important aspect of all of this. Now, the thing is that the client didn't know what they had at this point, and so they didn't react fast enough. They didn't have the right playbook. They perhaps didn't have an escalation profile developed for a use case like this. These kinds of things, again, this is what Cipher does. We are a security pure play. 24/7 monitoring and escalations is our core business. We do a lot of other things too. We'll touch on that here just briefly.
As I understand it, Dave, there were quite a few enterprises that were attacked with SolarWinds that actually had the telemetry data in their systems to indicate that they were under a SolarWinds attack, but that they just didn't know what to do with it, didn't have the people or practices in place to be curious, investigate, and so on. And so it seems like, what we talk about, technology, people, practices, and all those valuable cybersecurity frameworks are very, very important. In fact, why don't we on to the next slide here.
Actually, I should add, we did receive a lot of calls for the SolarWinds thing from companies who were not yet our clients. For Cipher's clients, we developed threat intelligence very, very quickly, a proprietary threat intelligence based on what we see across our installed client base of some 1,200 companies worldwide. So we had the TI available and applied it to all of the controls for our clients. Most of them didn't get hit with the SolarWinds problem. And of course, Emotet and other threats like that. Emotet started as a banking Trojan. It's evolved into much, much more than that these days. All of those are handled by threat intelligence that we apply to all of the controls that we monitor and manage. Now, while 24/7 monitoring and escalations is our core business, we do a lot of other consulting and services as well. And a big part of this is GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. We certify people for PCI and ISO 27001 and HIPAA security rule compliance, for GDPR privacy management compliance. Of course, there's not a certification for that yet, but we do an assessment. We can also do assessments based on the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is what we're looking at here on this slide. This is something that we subscribe to a great deal. All of our services participate in all of these things. And of course, we can run an assessment, an audit, if you will, on your company's NIST cybersecurity compliance. The first of the 5 domains, if you will, is identify. We want to be able to know what's in our environment. And in fact, the top 3 would be having an asset inventory of all your software, an asset inventory of all of your hardware, and a vulnerability management program. And we talked about bias of one phase or another in all of these operations. What the NIST CSF does is illustrate the importance of much more than that. So we want to identify things. We want to have a vulnerability management program that refreshes our asset inventory on a regular cadence. Now, the vulnerability management activities themselves start to blend over into the protect domain. We discover vulnerabilities that exist and we remediate them, thus protecting those endpoints. But there are a lot of protection or preventative measures that can be taken, like firewalls, IPSs, even DLP systems, which start to blend over into the detect domain. All of these controls working together, hopefully being correlated together and alerted on, alarmed in a SIM, serve a detection purpose. We want to be able to detect activities as they're happening. Taking a lights out approach to where nobody's watching and we're trusting the preventative measures to take care of it all on their own is a problem. That is what lends to the very extended lag time in identifying problems that are happening in your environment, attempted threat actor activities, or even an indication of compromise. So we want to detect all of those and have an escalation profile or an escalation path aggregating into a playbook that views them as a collection of actions to take in the case of events. We want to be able to detect those events, categorize them very quickly, and alert on them. We want to notify people about them. This is the response domain. We want to notify people that we think action needs to be taken, high confidence that it's a true positive. In fact, Cipher maintains an 80% or better true positive rate. We want to assist and enable the response activities involving things that we've identified, that our protective mechanisms have allowed us to detect. Now we want a response, but we want it to be as quick as possible. And so that's why we have a playbook to speed up response. First, we contain it, then we remediate it, and then we look at lessons learned. Now, the response activities, containment can happen very, very quickly, depending on how much of our clients' environments we're monitoring and managing for them. For instance, if we have access to their endpoint protection or AppGuard management console, and we see something bad happening, perhaps it's a malware event, we can go in using those management consoles capabilities to perhaps disable networking on that endpoint. We can get to it, but it can't get to anything else. That represents containment. Containment can happen in just minutes at that point. The bad thing can't spread. After remediation, we do want to review all of the events that happened. We do this through reporting and through operational reviews. We had an event. These are the actions that we're taking. This is how long it took to effect a remedy. What can we do to improve that? At this point, then, escalation profiles evolve. The playbook evolves to accommodate what we're seeing in different client environments. We want to be able to optimize that. And again, this is customized a lot from client to client. For instance, we might see a Windows administrator log into a Windows server across the network using that server's local administrator credential. To us, that can be a big deal. It depends on the nature of our client's business. Now, perhaps a manufacturer would say, you know, to us, we don't care. We would rather not even be alerted about that. And at which point we tune that kind of response out. We adjust the escalation profile. But a payment processor or a large bank may say that's critically important to us. That's at least a high severity, perhaps even a critical one, because we need identity of all activities that happen on anything, any asset in our environment. And so we would tailor our response to accommodate that. Different companies have different priorities. Different businesses and verticals are concerned with different aspects of their business such that their playbooks will vary, and we customize those for all of our clients. Next slide.
Okay, so we've seen in this one customer's experience where the CISO observed that 3 different malware attacks were blocked by AppGuard, that their existing EDR, AV, and other defenses did not detect. And so why don't we tell you a little bit about how AppGuard does what it does? Well, before I start explaining this sentence to you, I first need to kind of basically make the point that when you look at the 20+ years of malware samples that have been generated over all this time, it really comes down to one way or another, the adversary is using the enterprise's applications and utility applications against the enterprise. They're using these applications and utilities to get malware in, and or they're using these applications and utilities to actually help do the harm. And so if you can prevent the malware from doing what it needs to do, you can defeat the attack. So if you prevent applications and utilities from being used in the manner in which the adversary wants, you can prevent or stop the attack. So AppGuard is based on 3 different fundamental types of controls. The first one is AppGuard restricts what may launch or load from high-risk places on the endpoint, like your My Documents or Downloads folders. It's going to only let demonstrably trustworthy things launch or load from those places where they're signed by a trusted publisher, for example. Well, AppGuard is also going to help protect your endpoint by selectively and conditionally prohibiting some of those very powerful and useful OS utilities, but restricting when they can launch or by what they can launch, and basically reducing the attack surface, meaning you're not letting the adversary use those OS utilities in the manner the adversary wants. The second control is basically not letting those high-risk applications that consume weaponized documents or repeatedly get hijacked via some zero-day exploit. You've probably seen the news, for example, that Google Chrome has had something, I think it's like 8 to 10 software vulnerabilities in Chrome exploited this year alone. Last year was a similar year. And so if you can constrain high-risk applications like Google Chrome from doing what the adversary wants it to do, then you can defeat some of these attacks. And then the third control, it's kind of the opposite of this constrain thing. When we say constrain an application, we're saying protect the rest of the host from the app. Well, when we're talking about isolation rules, they're kind of like the last line of defense, where you're protecting part of the host from the rest of the host. That might be locking security settings, so nothing except the most trustworthy are able to change those settings. Or it might be protecting files such that only one or more specific applications are able to access those files. Or protecting the memory of applications, so credit card data or credentials can't be scraped from their memory and by the adversary. So AppGuard is not a detection tool. It prevents malware from doing what it needs to do. It blocks undesirable actions. So to try to translate this more into something more tangible, we've got to first recognize that every malware attack has a beginning and an end. And in between the beginning and the end, the malware is striving to perform a variety of different actions. And so the combination of these 3 different types of AppGuard controls is AppGuard's way of stopping the attack by blocking these actions. So let's give a few examples here. Maybe somebody is web browsing someplace and you got a drive-by download attack where the web browser unwittingly downloads some malicious file into the downloads folder or someplace else. Well, AppGuard's launch control is going to prevent the untrustworthy file from launching or loading, and therefore stop the attack. Another example is if you've got, say, Microsoft Word, which has been used to open some email attachment or whatever that turns out to be a weaponized Word document with dangerous macros and such. You want to apply these constraints via AppGuard to not let it do what the adversary wants it to do, or not let, say, Google Chrome do what it wants to do. Another thing is We also want to prevent the adversary from using some of those very powerful but dangerous operating system utilities. And one more thing about containment. It's not enough just to apply this to the one application, say Google Chrome or Microsoft Word or Adobe Acrobat. The challenge here is that other tools have strived to do that in the past, but they require explicit rules for each of the processes that make up the application. Whereas AppGuard makes this much simpler and therefore more practical and more powerful. It basically ensures that every child process of, say, Microsoft Word, Adobe Acrobat, Google Chrome, whatever, inherits the containment rules that were applied to the parent. So no matter how many times you patch, update, or whatever the application, AppGuard's always going to keep up with those changes. And if the adversary gets Adobe Acrobat to launch some other application, well, that other application is going to inherit those that containment control also. So it's adapting to the changes of the adversary's tactic naturally. Another thing we try to do with containment is not let one zero-day exploited application mess with another application. A pretty typical technique of the adversary is to inject malicious code into an otherwise trustworthy application to temporarily transform that application into a hacker tool. So again, what we're doing is we're not letting the malware do what it needs to do to achieve its goals. Sometimes that involves the malware, whether it's your Adobe Acrobat or some child process of Adobe Acrobat or what have you, trying to read the memory of either, say, that one Windows process where credentials are cached, or maybe read the memory of some point of sale application that might have credit card data in it, or what have you. So basically, this straitjacket is making sure that the application basically stays within its respective swim lane and cannot steal the data from other applications. And so now we get to some isolation. Well, one example of isolation is, it comes up with Google Chrome quite a bit. You know, there's a lot of different types of malware out there that once they get onto an endpoint, they go after that file on the endpoint where Google Chrome caches all of those website credentials that are saved as a convenience to us users, so we don't have to type in our username and password every time we go to a different website. Well, if the bad guys can steal copies of those credentials, then they can access all of those web resources. So one benefit of applying isolation rules with AppGuard to web browsers is only the web browser can access those credentials. We also are preventing adversaries from changing, say, Windows registry settings or other things like that that are necessary for them to take on that next step. For example, sometimes they have to, as part of their malware attack, instantiate a malicious Windows service. Well, to get to that, they have to be able to alter this one registry key. Well, if an AppGuard isolation rule is basically, in effect, locked that key such that no other process is able to change that key, then AppGuard has stopped the attack again by, again, not letting the malware do what it needs to do. And that actually just spoiled the thunder for my next bullet there, that by locking particular objects, we are preventing the adversary from doing some of those steps that are necessary for them to achieve their goals and get to the end there. So that's how AppGuard works. It's not a detection tool. It's just preventing those actions that the malware needs to do within the endpoint in order to achieve its goals. So it's very simple, and it's a very different approach from your AV or EDR. It's not judging good or bad or anything like that. It's just not allowing certain bad actions to occur that are necessary for malware to be successful. So it's taking a completely different approach. It gets along nicely with AV, EDR, and other tools on the endpoint. And that's why this CISO observed that AppGuard successfully stopped 3 different attacks in this time period that their AV, EDR, and other tools did not detect, because AppGuard takes a completely different approach. Sorry. I kind of stole my own thunder there. Sorry. So basically what this CISO found was that by combining the best of detection-based or pattern matching anti-malware technologies with something unique like AppGuard, which blocks malware attacks without having to recognize it, he got the best of both worlds. He was so neither one type of protection, whether detection or preventive controls based, neither one has to be perfect. What one misses, the other can defeat. And so that's a very powerful solution. Again, neither one has to be perfect, but the combination of the two has a very powerful outcome. Dave, you want to take us through some of this more security operations framework stuff?
Absolutely. Thanks, Eric. And in fact, I would make a couple of comments about a couple of slides ago where you were showing the beginning to the end of an attack cycle. The thing is that deployment of AppGuard and EDR solutions, in fact, of any security control, excuse me, requires tuning. Now, straight out of the box, they'll have a lot of rules and use cases which are of great value, but we don't want to run the risk of interrupting any business processes and pose business risk just because we deployed full bore, blocking everything, and all of a sudden something gets interrupted. A classic example of this would be in a software development company. In fact, I have a lot of experience in that personally. I was with a global software manufacturer for many years. And if I were to deploy an IPS, blocking network traffic that I found to be anomalous, I might interrupt the business processes of a developer who is working on socket code. He's working on code that would poke a byte into a memory location on another server. That server then responding to that byte's presence, socket programming. And it's not working for him because my IPS is blocking it. Now, that's costing him time. And it doesn't gain any dedication to the security program when things like that occur. You really want to make your users feel like they are part of your security program and not security as something that they feel that they need to overcome. And that plays into one note that Eric had a couple of slides ago about how you want to have your security controls be tamper-proof, not something that a user can disable. They can't turn off the vulnerability scan because they think it slows down their laptop too much, things like that. Now, AppGuard represents participation in the zero trust realm, okay? And so it oftentimes when we deploy AppGuard, when we deploy other EDR, no matter what we're deploying, we would like to be able to deploy in a monitoring only mode at first. Now, this contradicts a bit the case study's decision, a tough choice, to defer their SIEM integration in favor of deploying their manpower to get AppGuard installed and the new EDR installed instead. So they weren't monitoring it. We want to be able to have SIEM integration before we deploy other things, that then the SIEM will be gathering logs, correlating them together. If we're in a monitoring only mode, not only do we ensure that we're not interrupting any intended business processes in so doing, but that when things do happen that require attention and action on the security team's behalf, we can tell them. We see it right away. We're doing 24/7 monitoring, and so we can. Now, how do we do that? We have processes and workflows that we follow. Monitoring and escalation activities are pretty specific to a SIEM. We're collecting logs, we're normalizing them at the log collector level, making sure that the SIEM can parse these correctly. no matter what the log type is. In general, anything that can write to a syslog server can write to any SIEM on the market. Now, Cipher has our preferences as far as SIEM platforms that we prefer, but we are experts in virtually all of them that are on the market. So we collect the logs and normalize them, make sure that we can parse them correctly and read them, and then have use cases configured on the SIEM that will intentionally correlate one log against another, especially for things that we know are likely to happen. We categorize the events then as they alarm because of this correlation. We apply those to our escalation profiles that we've collaboratively arrived at with our clients. And if there is an escalation path, we follow it. Oops. Can we go back to the previous slide there, Eric? There we go. And then we conduct analysis, alerting, and reporting. Reporting is a critical ingredient for this. Not only do we want to have regular operational reviews to review what's going on, we want to be able to produce reports that fully engage our clients from the top to the bottom of their organization so that they can receive value from the services and optimally consume those services. Engagement with our clients is something that we pay a lot of attention to. And so the event life cycle, we detect something, we analyze it, we alert on it, we escalate it, we contain it, we assess and remediate for it, and then we do lessons learned, the recovery domain of the NIST CSF we were looking at a few minutes ago. We want to learn from the activities that we encounter. We want to be able to tune and evolve everything, likewise, to suit the threat landscape, the attack surface as it evolves, as it expands. Next slide, please. Now, in order to do this, our SOC is that services our 24/7 clients. We have 6 of them worldwide, 2 in South America, 2 in North America, and 2 in Europe. And we tend to service clients out of a single SOC. All of them are staffed on a 24/7 basis because we want to become an extension of our clients' security programs. We want them to know our analysts on a first name basis. And we want our analysts to be very familiar with our clients' environments so that they understand what they're looking at. In fact, we have a pod concept to where a certain group of analysts will be assigned to a certain group of our clients. Now, our tier 1 analysts are the ones with eyes on glass. They are the first ones to recognize that an event has occurred. And if an escalation profile exists for that category and type of event, they can escalate it. They can open tickets. They can conduct notifications. They do some basic analysis. But in a case where perhaps an escalation profile doesn't exist for this particular event, it has something that's new about it. They will escalate it to our tier 2 analysts who do a deeper analysis, start to do some forensics, establish what an escalation profile or path should be for this. And again, this will start to result in our making recommendations to our clients. We're seeing something new, something a little different. We think this should be at this or that security or severity level, priority level, and result in a notification path that is this, and so on. But if it's a high or critical priority or severity, then we bring in our tier 3 analysts. They start to conduct investigations. They do conduct forensics, tracing backwards through the kill chain to find out what root cause is. We can reverse engineer malware as we discover it because we do see 0 days. And so our labs, our R&D labs that develop threat intelligence for all of our clients, proprietary TI, reverse engineer these things and come up with ways to be able to prevent successful breach based on that. And we apply that to all of the controls that we manage and monitor for our clients. We find that having a 3-tiered organization like this enables us to respond most quickly to events as they occur and be able to remain within our SLAs, service level agreements that are specific to different priority and severity levels, what response times will be. We, of course, report on all of that along with our monthly and quarterly briefing reports and security operational reviews. Next slide.
Okay, so let's wrap things up here and quickly go to a brief Q&A. So basically what our CISO found here was that adding something like AppGuard that is controls based helped block what their detection based tools, antivirus, EDR, other tools were missing or detecting too late. And so basically he walked in thinking that maybe there was a detection bias. And so he wanted to add something else. And what he found was that in the course of his proof of concept deployment, and then later with the production deployment, AppGuard blocked 3 different malware attacks that was successful in confirming his hypothesis. And then what we've also learned from Dave in this session is that even when you've got technology nailed perfectly, you know, the elements of people and practices and getting them all working in harmony with the technology, that's also very essential. You need a complete solution: technology, people, and practices. And now I'm going to kind of jump things a little forward here. And we're going to jump into our Q&A for the time remaining, and just a little bit of some of the CISO's key takeaways you can read for yourself while we attend to those questions and answer them.
Sure, so I'll take it from here, Eric. So thank you, Dave and Eric. Well job, great job done. A couple questions that we had gotten in from the chat. The first one is, what is reporting like for MSS and MDR? And can this be customized to suit my industry?
It absolutely can. In fact, we do MSS, managed security services, for especially our larger enterprise clients that may be a global bank. It may be a company that has a fairly mature security program running already. It just doesn't integrate very well. They have a lot of disparate parts. It takes a lot of manpower for them to be able to monitor all of that on an effective and efficient basis. And so we can integrate all of those together. If there's not a SIM, we can bring one in. We have a lot of technology partners, or we have hosted SIM solutions that we can offer as well. Now, a few years ago, we realized that a lot of our clients, especially SMBs, didn't necessarily have a very mature security program running at that time. And so we came up with a service line that we call MDR, Managed Detection and Response, and it's kind of like an all-in-one solution. It not only brings 24/7 monitoring and a hosted SIM, hosted in AWS, the sensors or log collectors that we deploy in order to gather all of these logs into the SIM are also IDSs. And so we can inspect layer 7 activities and data and bring that to the table as well. They are also vulnerability scanners. And so everything they have visibility to, they can not only come up with a report that we can analyze and make recommendations for our clients on once a quarter as part of the service. They also feed into the SIM itself. And so we not only see events as they occur, but we can get a very good look at what vulnerabilities exist that might be susceptible to these kinds of threats. Now, our MDR service reports on a weekly basis, and these reports are tailored to the industry vertical that our clients are in. These show up on our proprietary portal once a week. Once a month, our analysts will go through all of the events that happened in that time period and produce a PowerPoint presentation suitable for presentation up to the board level. In addition to that, MSS and MDR both allow for reporting and reporting requests to be made on a customized basis, on an ad hoc basis. Anytime our clients want to, they can ask us to produce a report, and we have SLAs for response to those, as well as everything else that we do. So we want to engage our clients. Our clients will have a different appetite for reporting and meetings like this. Some of them may wish to do it weekly, others monthly. Sometimes quarterly is enough for them. They don't really want to participate more than that. And so we try to encourage more participation while accommodating their desires and their concepts and perceptions of what real value from our services represents.
Thanks, Dave. Now a question for AppGuard. So when I am reading here, so does AppGuard protect against ransomware?
Oh, sure. To us, ransomware is just malware with a somewhat different purpose. And so if you are not allowing certain actions to occur, then you're blocking ransomware attacks.
Thank you, Eric. Reading through another question here. What if we get breached? Can you respond and assist in remediation?
Absolutely. We do have red team services along with 24/7 monitoring and escalations using MSS and MDR services. We have a red team, and the red team are hackers. In fact, they're some of the best hackers in the world. One of our leads was recently recognized as one of the top 10 in the world as far as hacking, penetration testing, and so on goes. And so our red team typically is deployed for companies who are not yet our clients. They come to us with a problem. They'll say, we received notification from the FBI that ransomware is about to detonate in our environment. Of course, Cipher has very close ties with FBI and other international law enforcement, especially through our parent company, Prosegur. A lot of those guys are prior law enforcement services such as FBI. So we have close ties to them. So we deploy our red team in a situation like that. They discover instances of what is about to detonate and spread ransomware, encrypting data right and left, and we make sure that it doesn't deploy. That company actually was a rather large legal firm here in Atlanta, where I'm located, and they became our clients. Lots of situations like that happen. Now, our red team also conducts all of our penetration testing. We do quarterly ASV scanning for our PCI clients. They may also be our 24/7 monitoring clients. It tends to work out that our 24/7 clients tend to additionally over time start to consume more and more of our different service lines. They conduct annual pen testing then for those same PCI clients. Or it may be a client that is about to launch a new application, a new mobile application, a desktop application, a web application. We're seeing a lot of activity like that from crypto exchanges, which really have been proliferating a lot in the last few years. And we'll go in and, before they go live, conduct a penetration test for things like that. So we do have a red team for deployment in breach situations, but we would also like to utilize those same people in terms of penetration testing and ethical hacking to try to get ahead of the curve as far as things like that go.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dave. Appreciate that. I see we have one more question here. I know we're a little bit over, but we'll get in one more question from the audience. What EDRs is AppGuard compatible with?
Well, that's a great question. And that's a short answer too. And it's pretty much any EDR or any AV. Now, that's not to say right out of the box, AppGuard coexists perfectly with anything and everything. Sometimes with the EDR, you need to tell it to ignore AppGuard, or sometimes you might need to tell AppGuard to ignore the EDR or something like that. But generally, it's a very quick thing to identify and an even quicker thing to implement. So generally speaking, AppGuard coexists with just about anything.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eric. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. Just to go over again, all the participants will be able to get the slide deck and the recording. We will go ahead and send that to you via email. We really appreciate everyone for coming and joining in our webinar today, and a big thanks to Dave and Eric for also being our presenters here. Hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you, everybody. I hope Dave's dog did well in his alerts drill and followed the playbook.
He did. He's laying down and resting quietly now, thank goodness.
That's good to hear. All right, take care, everybody.